Welcome to Dream, Declare, Deliver with your host, Chris Gorell. Join us each week as we explore how to live a life by design by applying the tools and techniques of emotional intelligence and personal transformation. Here's Chris.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Dream, Declare, Deliver. I'm your host, Chris Gorell, and I want to talk a little bit about my book that just came out. It's called Learning to Feel. Learning to Feel is a book on emotional intelligence, and it's kind of a mixture between my own personal journey and some good foundational psychology of how emotions happen and how they act inside of us. One of the things that I draw on is the fact that, I've studied emotions all my life. I've studied psychology all my life. It's who I am or what I am. And Joseph Campbell said something funny about religion one time. He said that the greatest way to ensure that you won't have a spiritual experience is to study religion ahead of time. So in the same way, is the greatest way to ensure that I don't really fully experience emotions is for me to have studied emotions so much. So I know all about emotions. I can tell you all about their definitions and things like that, but have I actually really felt them fully? When I run workshops, I often ask people, how many emotions have you really fully experienced? You can say, like, I got the full length and breadth and depth of this emotion. And most of the time, the average in a group of people comes out to be around 5 or 6. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds. I have one lexicon that I refer to sometimes. It has over 500 different emotion words that are distinct from one another. That are, some are similar, but they're different. And most of us can only come up with 5 or 6 emotions that we've fully experienced. And even when I challenge people to write a whole list, as many as they can, a lot of people tap out at about 30 or 40 words, emotion words. So again, we don't have a great emotional vocabulary. We don't have a lot of experience with emotions. So Learning to Feel is really a book about how do I identify what's going on inside of me? Because here's the thing about emotions. We are emotional beings. There's no way around it. Brené Brown says in her book, The Atlas of the Heart, she says, let's be clear, emotions are driving the bus. Thinking and action are not in the front seat riding shotgun with emotions. They're hogtied in the trunk. Emotions are clearly in charge. We are emotional beings. And so, it's important for us to understand what emotions do and what they're for and how they're made. So emotions don't just sort of happen. They're not just like, ooh, I felt this, or you made me feel such and so. What happens is there's a thought or a belief that happens right before the emotion occurs that we're not aware of most often. We're not there thinking of that. When a loud bang goes off and we feel a startle, our emotion is, fear or startle or something like that. We're not aware of the fact that we just heard a loud noise. Our brain said, well, that might be an explosion that could hurt me. I need to jump out of harm's way. It has those thoughts, but they happen at such a high speed that, we just hear the sound and feel the emotion, and they happen right on top of each other. So we're constantly reacting to what I call the interpretation of what's going on. Now, we never really for certain see the full reality. What we see is our perception of reality. We think that we see with our eyes because there's this image in front of me that I see when I'm talking to you or when I'm looking at my Zoom lens right now. I see an image and it looks like it's out there, but really what's happening is my brain is interpreting those data, that are coming in through my sensors, my eyes, and they're through my ears. So I have a stereo sense of where you are in front of me, but that's all being done inside of our brain. So we see with our brain, we hear with our brain, we taste with our brain, we touch with our brain. These things here, these sensors are just data collectors. They're sensory collectors that give information, data to the brain so that the brain can make sense out of our world. So also inside that meaning-making structure inside of our head is all of the past experiences that we've encountered throughout our entire life. So no matter how old you are, you have a whole array of things that you've experienced already that forms the foundation of our meaning-making. And the way the brain makes sense out of things is this is like that. So let's say when you're learning new mathematics or another way to do something that you've not learned before, your brain says, oh, this is like arithmetic, only we're now substituting letters for numbers. And so it makes sense out of it by saying, comparing it to what it knows. We do the same thing when we have an emotional reaction. It's always going to that database of experiences and then projecting into the situation or the next moment or the future what might happen based on our experience. So we would do well for ourselves to learn how we create these emotions, how these happen inside of us, because what they point to is not the emotion. We don't want to get hung up on just feeling feelings for feeling's sake. What we want to be doing is using that emotion as the doorway into understanding what is inside of us as the stored memory and the beliefs and the thoughts that we have that are causing our reactions to these situations. And how that happens is there's an experience that we had, and then there's an interpretation that our mind made of that. Now, the experience that happened is history. It's there. It's, like whether it was a good experience or a bad experience, whatever it was, that's just something that happened. The interpretation we have on that is filled with emotion, abstraction, meaning making, and things like that. So that lives in our memory. This stuff here is, often overshadowed by what our interpretation is. So we're walking around, we're an interpretation machine, and things happen to us and we make it mean something that causes an emotional reaction. I'll give you an example. I have several friends who live on the island of Maui and lived at one, recently up until just last week in the city of Lahaina. They don't live there anymore. They are fending for their lives. One friend lost everything, his cars, his house, his business. And what's interesting, he's out on the streets helping other people. Because that's who he is. And I have, other friends who lived in the same area. Again, they're dealing with it as best they can. So I see that happening and I make meaning out of that. And I say, this guy or this gal is doing X, Y, and Z. They're serving their community. They're serving other people. That's who I know them as. And of course, that's what's there. But they're also feeling trauma. They're also in a situation that is way beyond any human experience. None of us has woken up, from a colorful environment to find it entirely black and white, and that's what Lahaina looks like today. It looks like black and white. It's all charred. Everything is just rubble and dust. And so we look at that and we feel compassion. We look at that and we feel, shame, guilt, survivor's guilt that we aren't there on the streets with our friends, helping out, bucket brigades, doing whatever we can to help people survive and make ends meet. We feel compassion. We feel sadness. There's all kinds of different reactions. Some people want to blame whoever set or however the fire got started. Some people want to, blame environmental change or global warming or, like whatever it is, we all have that reaction, some kind of reaction to the situation because it's something that's right in front of our face and that we react to. So, so having an emotional reaction is an important thing to have, but it's really important to dig into why am I having that reaction? If, for example, I feel compassion, what that means is that I am, feeling love and the pain of the people that I love, like, who are in that situation. And I can only feel compassion because I know what it feels like to feel my kind of pain, the things that I've experienced in my life. And so compassion is one of those things where the calm part of the passion is that we also feel, and we know that feeling, and we can identify with it. When we're giving help or counsel to people in Maui, it's important for us not to say, I know how you feel. What is important to say is, I'm here. I'm with you. Because the one thing that trauma does to us is it makes us not want to feel. It makes us want to close down, curl up in a ball, and hide until it's all over, because it's way outside of our, not even our comfort zone. It's way outside of our capacity to cope with it. And so we want to be able to provide help and support to our friends who are going through this trauma. But at the same time, you can't sit there and say, there, this will all pass, it'll all be better soon, that patronizing kind of response is not compassionate. Compassion says, I know how it feels to hurt. And I know what I need most when I hurt is somebody to be sitting right beside me so that I don't feel like I'm the only one feeling this. The intensity of trauma is so great that the mind thinks nobody else could possibly understand what I'm going through right now. It's that intense, it's outside of our frame of reference. So it must be outside the frame of reference of everybody else. And so, our minds think, I'm the only one going through this. I'm the only one who's having this kind of reaction. I see my friends out on the street helping each other, and I think they're doing much better than I am. And so everything collapses in. It's important for us to recognize that and just to be able to sit with that and say, if you have a friend in Maui, call them and say, hey, just want you to talk. Don't have to do anything about it. I'm just here to listen, and I want you to know you're not alone. I'm here. I'll always be here. I'll take your call at 3:00 in the morning. If that's what time it is, I don't care. You can call me anytime. I'm here for you. And then just shut up and listen, because that's what's needed. In trauma, what's needed is companionship. The touch and the presence of other people. Because we do feel so alone in that. That's an extreme example of an emotional reaction, because the interpretation that's going on inside the person who's feeling this trauma is nobody else is feeling this. I'm the only one who's having this difficulty dealing with the situation. I feel hopeless. I feel helpless. It's making all bunches and bunches and bunches of interpretations based on the sheer fact that it's never been in that situation, and it's not like anything it has in its memory files. So it's outside the bounds of meaningfulness. It does not make sense. It doesn't compute. And so the system goes into overload. The whole, biological, endocrinological, and the whole autonomic nervous system goes into overload because there's no reference point. It's pure unknown. And so, that's kind of what's going on in that. Then I only bring up that extreme example just because it's something that's present to all of us today, just as flooding is happening. My daughters both live in Vermont, and both of them are dealing still with the aftermath of the floods that happened in Vermont, both in the state capital and east or west of there in along the Winooski River, where there was just massive flooding, and people are just still in shock. They're shaking, they don't know how to do it. And both of them, provide first line relief for that. So there's trauma everywhere around us. And it's important for us to know what's going on so that we can know how we can be with that person in support. I don't go into trauma in learning to feel. I really talk more about how we can understand our own thoughts and beliefs systems, so that we know how we're behaving and what we're doing. I wondered, have you ever had the experience, for example, of saying, why did I do that? Why did I just do that? That's not who I am. I just did something that's counter to my values, or I just did something that's not me, and yet what we find is that that's a reaction. And it's most often an emotionally triggered reaction. The emotions are in the driver's seat, as Brené Brown says. It's an emotional reaction to some situation inside of us that we haven't unearthed. The whole impetus for the book, Learning to Feel, was that I found myself doing something, and when my wife asked me, "Why did you do that?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, that's not possible. Why do you not know?" I said, I don't know why I did that. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to you. And I went on this quest to find out what's at the core, what's at the bottom, at source of my own behaviors. That something I could decide I would actually do in reaction was not something that was, integral and integrated into, who I am as a person and what my beliefs are, or at least the stated beliefs that my cognitive mind, my cerebral cortex mind, has as it. But there are these values and these beliefs that are deeply embedded in us from our childhood, things that we made as interpretations when we were just little kids that still act as programming. For example, you may have, I was an unwanted little kid. I was a geeky, weird, overweight, chubby kid with husky Expando pants and things like that, broken glasses with the tape in the middle and all of that, and never picked on any teams or anything like that until I, grew into my body and as a high schooler. But as a kid, I made the interpretation of that I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of friendship. I'm not worthy of being picked on a team. I'm not, like all of those kinds of things. Now, I grew out of that and I went into, my teens and, got active in athletics and, was a, varsity tackle and a varsity wrestler and like all that kind of stuff. Went into college, got degrees, and on and on and on. Long forgotten in the back of my head, still sitting there is a little 5-year-old kid who doesn't feel worthy. So sometimes my reactions are out of, I'm not worthy, when I know cognitively, I know that I'm worthy. I know that I'm valued. I know that I'm loved. I know that I'm respected in my profession, but there's still a part of me. There's sometimes when that little kid gets tapped in whatever the situation is that my mind is interpreting that is somewhat similar to where that little kid lived, that thing pops in. That belief pops in, I'm not worthy. And I do something out of neediness. I do something out of wanting to be liked, and I don't need to do that, but the 5-year-old did. So what it is when we have an emotional reaction, especially one that's, kind of discontinuous, I'd say, to what we're normally feeling. When we have that kind of an emotional reaction, we say, all right, what's behind that? What's the thought? What's the belief that's in there that's causing this reaction? Because that's old stuff. That's really, kind of old things, rotting in the cupboard somewhere back there. And so when I'm able to get to that point of discovery of, wow, that came from my worthiness thing, that was just a coping mechanism that as a 5-year-old boy, I made up, and it served me probably as a way of coping with my situation as a little kid, but it doesn't serve me as a man, as a grown up, as a mature person. And so I get to reinterpret the event. You know, if the interpretation was just a story that my 5-year-old kid's brain made up, well, I can reinterpret that same situation. Situation was I didn't get picked on the team. You know, I made up I'm not worthy. But I can make up a different story now. I'm an adult. I go like, oh, I didn't get picked on the team. They probably wanted somebody who could run faster because they wanted to win the game. You know, doesn't mean anything about me. It means more about what they wanted and what they were doing and trying to compete and win than it has to do with me. You know, it has nothing to do with my worth. I am worthy. I am wonderful. I am a child of God. I am loved. You know, I am a great father and a grandfather and a husband and all of those wonderful things. And I am worthy of all that. You know, that interpretation doesn't serve me anymore. So I make up a new interpretation that says, oh, well, they picked another kid because they needed somebody speedy on the bases. You know, it's simple as that. You know, they just wanted to win. It had nothing to do with me. It had to do with them. And so we can go back when we unlock these beliefs and thoughts that are in our heads through understanding our emotions and the fact that there's that system in place that causes emotions. You know, we're not stuck with the emotion anymore. We're not stuck dwelling on the emotion, saying, why do I feel down or why am I feeling this way? We're able to unlock it and say, all right, what's going on? What was the story made up that's causing that reaction? And then I can reinterpret the situation, get different, you know, I'm not talking about flights of fantasy or breaking from reality. I'm talking about what's a different grown-up version of that situation that I can interpret it as. And in doing that, I'm freed from that self-beat up. I'm freed from that need to be wanted and that neediness that just nobody wants that around. You know, it just doesn't feel good to be around a needy person. And so we're able to deal with it that way. Now, I say all that now, and I go back to the trauma situation in Maui and talking to friends who are on the island. I am not ever going to say that to them right now, that they're in an interpretation of a devastating, you know, horrific event, traumatic event. That would be the most uncaring thing that I could possibly do. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about doing is understanding that they are in a traumatic situation, that they are feeling trauma, and that I can sit with them and be present to them in that situation. You know, they're going to come away from it at some point with an interpretation, maybe good, maybe bad, maybe serving them, maybe doesn't serve them. That's later on down the pike, and maybe somewhere down there we can deal with it. You know, I worked one time with a veteran who was in a transformation program and had a severe reaction to something that was said and that flashed him back into his he called it his monster, you know, inside. And it just took him to the side and I said, tell me the story. Tell me the story. He said, you don't want to know. And I said, I do. I want to listen to it. And I just had him tell me the story and then tell it again, you know. And at some point, when you're telling the story over and over again, in retrospect, it becomes a story. We can do that therapeutically later on. You can't do that in the moment. In the moment, they're in survivor mode. You know, in the moment that man was in a battle situation in Afghanistan or Iraq or some place in the Far East or Middle East, and he was in survival mode. And all he could do was get out, and all he could do was survive. And the way he said it is he went in with 5 men and 4 men came out. One of them died, and that was him. You know, he felt his soul had died, that he had lost a part of who he was. And so we just talked that through until he could gain some perspective again on the fact that he's not there. You know, we can't do that when they're live in the situation. When they're in a battle situation, you know, we're ducking for cover too. You know, when people are in Lahaina and they're sifting through the dust and the rubble to try to find any remnants of their own lives, or even, you know, I watched this heartbreaking clip of the police chief from Lahaina saying, you know, to the reporters, please don't walk in this area. There are body parts in there, and all it is ashes, and we're trying to identify through DNA who these people are. and when you walk on that, that's what you're walking on. You're walking on people, our neighbors and our friends. Don't do that, so they're in that level of survival right now. When a chief of police is in tears, talking to reporters, telling them not to walk in sacred ground. He's not fantasizing anything. He's not, out of touch with reality. He's dealing with a very deep reality. And so we get to respect that, when people are in trauma. So there are two different things here that I wanted to talk about. One was, how do we learn what feelings are and how we can use them, and how they can, teach us or bring us to an awareness of what's going on inside of us. And the other thing was it's juxtaposed against a background of tragedy that we're experiencing as a nation, as people, as friends. And we need to be cognizant of, and sensitive to the actual emotional reaction that people are going through when they feel totally hopeless in their current situation. So thank you for listening. I hope, you get a chance to get out to Amazon, or Barnes & Noble and pick up a copy of Learning to Feel. It's available also on Kindle. The reports from people who are reading it, from the critics, have just been stellar. I'm so flattered by what people are saying about the book, and I hope you get some benefit from it. I hope it makes a difference for you and for hundreds and hundreds of other people, because that's my goal in writing, is to provide information and provide background so that people can, live the life that they were born to live the life of their dreams. So whether it's Typhoon Honey, which is, making it through these trauma reactions and severe crises. The subtitle on Typhoon Honey was "The Only Way Out Is Through." Ain't no other way. You got to go through it. You got to go through it. And Learning to Feel is just really a journey, partly personal journey of mine, to go back and reconnect with the heart and the core of emotions, so that I better understand who I am and how I'm reacting. And so that, it's kind of a blazing the trail so that other people can do the same thing too. So again, it's Learning to Feel, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, everywhere you can find it. So pass the word around, enjoy it. I hope you get a chance to read it. And thank you for listening to Dream, Declare, Deliver. Talk to you next time.